And we continue, and we were looking at labor markets and basically if they're loose, fixed, or tight, and what that would mean for how we pay people. So we already talked about loose. We're going to look at fixed labor supply or fixed labor market, which is really, as we said earlier, the supply of labor is fixed regardless of the demand. So there's a set amount of people regardless of the demand. So the reality is we might have to pay whatever it takes, or we find some substitutes for the labor. And then in a tight labor market, what would we do? Let's just remind ourselves of tight, where the demand for labor exceeds the available labor supply. So there's not enough people to pull from to fill the jobs. So in that case, we have to create incentives for individuals to enter that particular labor market or to acquire the skills that we need as employers. So we might have to increase pay rates. So this will encourage people, therefore, to acquire this skill because these jobs certainly look most attractive. So let's look at these different labor markets and let's see if we can find a category of skill or job that might fall under them. So loose labor market is where the supply of labor exceeds the demand. We have plenty people qualified in that area than we have jobs. So I know I don't have any empirical evidence for this, but we have a lot of people who are qualified in qualified accountants or ACCA level 2. Plenty people. If you put an ad out for an accounts officer ACCA level 2, hundreds if not thousands of people might actually apply. So we have lots of people for few jobs. So that could be considered a loose labor market. Fixed labor market is a hard one. I'm not really too sure of that, right? We could come back to that. And tight labor market is where the demand for labor exceeds the available labor supply. So what position do we really, I actually think HR could almost fall in that. People are desperate for good HR people and they can't find them. You all with me? So that's good news for you all. But any position that is relatively the skill set is not found here. They're gonna have to increase salaries to get people interested or to get people to switch. So that's when the demand for the labor actually exceeds what we currently have. Okay, so let's now look at the economic views of labor markets. So all of this was just looking at the labor market itself. Now let's look at the economic views. And these are a number of common definitions that you should have all done in macroecon way back when, right? So the labor force, as we know, is everybody over the age of 16, except for the military, who are either employed or looking for work. And one you may not be familiar with is the non-labor force. So those are people who are not looking for work. Maybe they're in prisons or psychiatric wards, or they're stay-at-home spouses, their children, they would be included there, those in the military. Then we have the unemployment rate, which of course is the level of unemployment divided by the labor force. So we know exactly how many people are unemployed. But we also have the employment rate, defined as the number of people currently employed, divided by the adult population, or those over 16, okay? Self-employed will count as employed here. So obviously these sort of indicators are going to also influence the organization. So let's say we were a country that hardly had anybody available to work. Let's say half of the country was working in the military and you couldn't pull from them, then that's going to severely impact who you're going to pull from to fill positions. But let's say we have a huge labor force. Let's say we have we had a population boost and we have thousands of people who are really like between the ages of 16 and 20 and just lots of people to pull from, then fine. Obviously, the higher the unemployment rate, then, well, let's think about this. If the unemployment rate is high, meaning if there are a lot of people who are unemployed, isn't that actually kind of beneficial to organizations that they should have the cream of the crop to choose from? So just some things to look at that obviously are going to impact the organization and what they choose to pay. So then let's now look at the product market factors. We looked at the labor market, let's look at the product. And in particular, we're looking at the level of demand for the product and service and the degree of competition. So once we're trying to make a profit, we must generate enough revenue to cover expenses. That's bottom line, right? Including compensation expenses. So the pay level is going to be constrained by my ability to compete in the product service market, okay? So what do we mean here? The product market conditions, therefore, to a large extent determine what the organization can afford to pay. So if an organization is not really doing very well because their products and services aren't selling, then can they actually afford to pay more people? No, that's the sad reality, right? So the level of demand for the product or service is a big one, okay? If this is going to put a lid on the maximum we could pay for people. If we pay more for than this lid, if we pay more than the maximum, then we're going to have to pass this cost on to consumers by increasing the price that we charge, or we're going to have to put more money into labor costs, which means we'll have a larger labor budget. So the product is actually, the demand for the product or service is going to have an impact. If everybody wants our product and service, then we'll be in a position where we could pay more. The next one, of course, is the degree of competition. So if I'm in a really competitive market, I'm less able to raise my prices, because if I do, people are going to go to my competition, right? So in terms of, let's say, cars, that's a really competitive market. If I raise my prices, then people are going to go to my competition, and then I'm in trouble, right? And then, of course, I'm in trouble because then I won't be making enough sales. But high-end products seem to just get away with costing more and more and more each time, okay? The next thing to look at is the organizational factors. We looked at the labor market, we looked at the product demand, and now we're looking at the organizational factors. These also will affect the pay level and the pay mix. So we're going to look at 4: the industry you're in, the strategy you have, the size of the organization, and the individual managers themselves. So the industry in which we're in which an organization operates influences the technologies it used. Some industries are more labor intensive than others. They require more physical people in the job. They tend to pay lower than industries that are much more driven by technology, such as petroleum or oil or pharmaceuticals, just because of the nature of the industry, right? Of course, differences in the technologies actually adopted within the industry may affect the pay. So if you're really into like oil drilling or extraction of minerals, really kind of very specific technologies, you're probably going to have to pay people who have those skills and probably pay high. But on the flip side, if we look at a cash register now, no longer, I mean, it's kind of foolproof almost. They've taken away some of the skills required. You just had to press the button or scan the item even. There's not really much skill in just scanning an item and swiping a card, right? So that's reduced the level of skill. Okay, so technology has impacted the level of skill both upward and downward. Interestingly, larger organizations tend to pay more than smaller ones, because I guess the reality is larger organizations tend to make larger profits and therefore have the ability to pay more. Fair enough. And the other thing that we need to look at is people's preferences. What do people actually really want? Do they want healthcare? Do they want pension? Do they want bonuses? Do they want stock options? The more that we can understand what employees prefer is what's going to actually help make us more competitive. So a lot more people are demanding childcare options or flexible working hours or longer vacations or bigger bonuses. We have to take into consideration actually what people prefer. And then of course the strategy, that's a big one. What strategy are we actually using when we're thinking about designing our compensation based on the external market? So here are some examples, right? Some employers will say, you know what, their strategy for compensation here is low wage, no benefits or services. So they're just competing on price and price alone. They're trying to max out profits. So people like Nike and Reebok. Another organization may decide, you know what, I don't want to pay much, but I want to give a lot of benefits or services like childcare or English classes for new Marriotts, which is done by Marriott Hotel. English classes for new Marriotts, Lord. English classes for new immigrants, which is done by Marriott. And then, of course, we have other ones that offer high wage, high services or benefits, such as BP. So they might get really good money, great services and benefits, but the reality is the job security there may be quite low. You could be gone in a week if they decide they're laying off people. Okay, so all of this is very interesting as to what could be impacting how we decide to pay when we take in the external environment. Now we're going to look at how do organizations actually decide what their relevant market is, because it's not as straightforward as we think. So first of all, I may look at the competitors. my direct competitors. So if I am a KFC, I'm going to look at a Subway or a Royal Castle. If I am an RBC, I'm going to look at a Republic Bank. But what I can also look at is the jobs themselves, so the skills and knowledge required and the importance to the organization's success. So example, a lawyer in a law firm. But a lawyer could also work in an accounting firm, or a lawyer can work in a ministry, or a lawyer could work in, y'all with me, or an HR manager can work in any different industry. So I can't just look at people who are providing similar products or services. I also have to look at what that position is being paid at in the different industries as well. So how do we determine where we position ourselves? This is what we call our options when it comes to pay policy. And we actually already talked about it. We said that pay level is the average of all the rates inside an organization. And we can determine 3 policies we could have: to lead in terms of pay, or rather in terms of compensation, to meet, or to follow competition. Okay. There are newer policies which emphasize flexibility. So for example, you might decide, for my senior management team, I'm going to match, but for my entry level people, I'm going to lead. So you can actually change it up a little bit. So what do these really mean? How are we going to position ourselves in terms of competitiveness of pay? Okay. So as I said, the first one is the lead policy. We're going to lead in the competitive environment, meaning we're going to pay more than everybody else. This obviously will max out our ability to attract and retain the best people. And of course, people will not be very dissatisfied with pay because they know they're getting paid more. This in itself may offset the less attractive features of the work. Okay, so maybe the job is really stressful and high paced and very, very demanding. Well, that's why we're paying more, right? Of course, it may also have a negative impact in that the cost of paying may have to be passed on to the employer. Yeah, I mean, the consumer. Okay, so employees may have to pay existing employees more to ensure that there's equity. We may decide to pay what the competition pays. We match them. And this is the most common approach used. We know that Subway paying this, so we're going to pay this. We're matching it, right? So we position approximately equal to that of the competitors so that we could have some ability to attract recruits, but we're not trying to pay more than we have to, okay? When we pay less, people are going to be dissatisfied because I'm comparing themselves to competitors. So this eliminates that. Okay. So it doesn't disadvantage the employee, but neither does it give them any kind of competitive advantage. And then the third one is lag. We may actually decide to pay below market rates. Now, if we do that, we may not be able to attract the best people. However, if we say that we're going to pay low base pay, but we're going to give great stock ownership plans or something in the future, then that could encourage people to come. Yeah. So it's a choice. There's no right or wrong. We might decide to pay less, but we might offer other things like work-life balance or being close to home, etc. Okay. So there's no right and wrong. An organization just needs to decide where it's positioning itself: lead, lag, or match. Okay. So think about where you think your organization has positioned themselves. Do you know? Have they chosen to lead? Have they chosen to lag? Have they chosen to match? Okay. But as I said earlier, the reality is they may actually do all 3. For their engineers, they may decide to lead because they want the best. For their accountants, they can match because they're okay with that. For another position that they know the labor demand is like they have so much supply to pull from, they may decide to lag. So they may have more than one choice here, and their policies may differ accordingly. Back to our final slide here. If you remember on that pay model, we always end with efficiency, fairness, and compliance. So am I going to be efficient? Am I gaining competitive advantage by how I've positioned myself, or am I at a disadvantage? Fairness. Are people satisfied with their pay? Remember, people are going to compare against others. So are they satisfied when they compare? And then of compliance, of course, in terms of minimum wage or pensions, etc. Am I complying with all the different elements of my compensation package? So everything has to come back to these 3 questions when we're dealing with compliance. Am I being efficient? Is this helping me achieve my goals? Am I being fair? And am I being compliant? And that is it. So a lot in this one, but this is all about understanding where organizations position themselves under this concept of external competitiveness. Do they lead, lag, or match the competitor, and all the other factors that come into play. Thanks much.